Why did you want to write a book on Lenin and 1917?
Mainly because I felt with the centenary approaching, this was a few years ago, that there was likely to be a lot of material out about Lenin, Leninism, the Bolshevik Revolution, what came out of the Bolshevik Revolution. My feeling was that a lot of that would be quite historically uninformed and ill-informed, and especially on the left, that there was still this great culture of kind of romantic over-idealization, simplification of the Bolshevik Revolution and what happened to the Bolshevik Revolution and how Bolshevism eventually mutated into Stalinism. And I wanted to put a different perspective, if you like. Not the traditional sort of right-wing Cold War perspective of all revolutionary change, all attempts to transform capitalism into socialism would inevitably end up as an authoritarian dictatorship, but a perspective from the democratic left that would show the democratic experiments and the sense of liberation that was taking place in 1917, that arose from the February 1917 revolution, but that was controlled and perverted and turned into an authoritarian one-party state very swiftly after October 1917 by the Bolsheviks. And I wanted to kind of explain for the contemporary left, for a new left, the occupied generation if you like, to show that there was a chance for a radical democratic experiment in 1917 and after, but Leninism wasn't that chance, and Leninism led to the defeat of that opportunity. And I wanted to do my bit, if you like, in the centenary year to put that kind of alternative left history out there, and hopefully I've done that.
In your view, has the feeling that the left is still indulgent towards Lenin and the Bolsheviks been borne out this year?
Yes, it has, unfortunately, and even more so than I'd anticipated. And the left, broadly speaking, has always been, and I don't just mean the Leninist, Trotskyist left, I mean the broad left has always been indulgent, has always had a sort of over-romanticised view of Lenin and the Bolsheviks. But this year I think you've seen it perpetuated even more, and that's surprising. I mean, there's been a number of events to commemorate the centenary. There's been exhibitions at the Royal Academy and the British Library, which have all been excellent in their way. But in terms of major left works, books re-examining new histories that look at those events, we've seen books by substantial writers like Tariq Ali and China Miéville that both in their way epitomise that problem. I mean, Tariq Ali's is an interesting book, but it very much does sugarcoat some of the things that the Bolsheviks did very swiftly after October 1917. The curtailment of civil liberties, the curtailment of freedom of the press, the closure and manipulation of factory committees and Soviets that didn't carry out the Bolshevik government's policies or had any independent views. And also China Miéville's work, October, which is extremely well written and a very exciting read, very much deliberately confines itself to the period February to October 1917, the heroic period, if you like, the inspirational period of the revolution. And I think that that's no accident. I mean, he has a brief epilogue, but China's book does not examine in any serious way the reasons why the state established by the Bolshevik Party, the one-party state, so swiftly mutated into the Stalinist one-party state. So in a sense, yes, I'm afraid I think that there's still an awful lot of left romanticising of Bolshevism and Leninism. And I think that does need to be addressed.
Defenders of the Bolsheviks maintain that a bureaucratic one-party state only arose because of the pressures of the Civil War and foreign intervention. Is that not the main reason for those developments?
Actually, I don't believe they are the main reason for those developments. They're significant. The pressures of the Civil War, the need to win the Civil War, did not help more democratic currents within the Bolshevik Party. The historical record is fairly clear. The Bolsheviks, Sovnarkom, the Council of People's Commissars led by Lenin, was in theory meant to be accountable to the Congress of Soviets. And this was the rationale for the Bolshevik insurrection, that it would protect Soviet power and would hand power to the Soviets, to the body that represented the Soviets. But immediately after October, it did not do that. It unilaterally took power to itself. It issued decrees without reference to the Congress of Soviets. It most notoriously, of course, shut down the Constituent Assembly, which was the only national election that took place in that period, and in which the Socialist Revolutionary Party was emerged as the victor with the most seats. Those things happened before the Civil War escalated. Those things happened before foreign armies intervened. And it also should be added that foreign armies intervened in a much, much less coordinated way than is generally thought in left mythology. The general excuse of civil war and foreign intervention, I think, is much overdone, and cannot get the Bolsheviks off the hook for creating the structures of a bureaucratic one-party state that eventually mutated into Stalinism.
And what lessons do you think the Bolshevik Revolution has for today?
I don't believe the Bolshevik Revolution as a program for securing governmental or military power with a view to transforming a capitalist system into a democratic socialist system has any lessons for today at all. The concept of what we might call the revolutionary left, not that I believe there's anything that you could seriously call a revolutionary left, replicating the Bolshevik Revolution, i.e. securing telegraph stations, internet service providers, strategic points like bridges, post offices, railway stations, etc. And then physically replacing whatever government they've existed at that moment with a socialist government is essentially ludicrous. The chances of such a thing happening, even during a time of social upheaval, are almost zero. And any attempt to do so would be disastrous and lead to an extreme right-wing authoritarian neo-fascist reaction. What I think needs to be challenged is the idea that the philosophy, the concepts of Lenin, of Leninism and the Vanguard Party have any application or ever had any application to the working class and the socialist and labour movement. My answer is that I think that Lenin and Leninism and Bolshevism has no relevance today at all to attempts to transform neoliberal capitalism into a democratic socialist society. And to that end, I think that the lessons of the Bolshevik Revolution are that there is a need to understand the history, the truth of that revolution, and to look at what other, more viable, more popular, more democratic alternatives existed at that time and that maybe deserve a little bit more recognition today.
So does the Russian Revolution have a positive legacy?
I think it does, but I don't think it's what the standard Leninist Trotskyist line would have it. For me, the positive legacy of the Russian Revolution comes from all the grassroots democratic structures and institutions set up between February and October, and to a certain extent after October, such as the workers' Soviets, such as the factory committees, such as peasant communes set up to redistribute the landed estates, work done after October by more unorthodox Bolsheviks like Alexandra Kalante on women's emancipation, on tackling sexism and women's oppression in Russia, work done by people like Anatoly Lunacharsky on educational reform, and also a whole series of experiments set up by anarchists and anarcho-syndicalists like Nestor Makhno in Ukraine. And my book focuses as much on those as on the actions of Lenin and Trotsky. And I hope that today's anti-capitalists, socialists, Democrats find that useful.